How often are you guys thinking about your audio levels when you're filming, to when you're in DaVinci Resolve, to when you're exporting your final project for the whole world to see? You should be thinking about it right at the start. So we're going to talk about audio levels from camera to DaVinci Resolve and on your export in this video. I'm going to give you all the tips that you need to know as far as where to set what for dialogue, for sound effects, for music. How do we set all these different levels? How do we set it in our camera? What should it be at? And how do we ensure that we've got good levels in our project when we're working with it in DaVinci Resolve? And then when we export it, how do we know that we're going to get some good levels for wherever we might be putting our project, whether it's film, TV, maybe it's YouTube, whatever it might be? You need to have all of your audio ducts in a row, everything set up properly so that it's easy to understand, it's easy to watch, and the audience is captivated by your awesome video. So the first step in the audio process is right here. It's filming into your camera. Where do you like to set these levels? Now, for me, on my cameras, generally I try to aim for around -18 to -12 dB, somewhere in that range. That way, my audio is not too loud. I'm going to have enough headroom that I can play with the audio a little bit in DaVinci Resolve, and I should have enough signal to work with the audio well, and not too much so that I'm end up peaking. So take a look at these couple clips here. I'm going to show you what it looks like when you record properly on your camera versus when you don't. Maybe you're a little too quiet, you got to boost it up. And then what it sounds like if your camera's just levels are too high and it's peaking. So check out these videos and tell me which camp are you in when it comes to setting your levels when you start recording. Check it out. So when it comes to your audio, it's super important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be around that -12 dB range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work with once you get into Fairlight. So this is what it sounds like with some good audio levels where it should be. We're going to take this and bring it into Resolve and work with it there. Here's what it sounds like if your recording levels are too low on your camera. If we take it and we bring it into Fairlight and then we boost the level so you can actually hear it, kind of like this, it's going to introduce extra background noise that we don't need to have there, that doesn't need to be there if we set our camera levels properly so we get the good audio to bring it into Fairlight and then make it even better yet. And if you set your levels too high, it doesn't matter what you do in Fairlight, you're not going to be able to fix it. It sounds like this, it's distorted, it's peaking, it's no good. You want to make sure you set those levels good in your camera first. So in that first example there, we had some good audio levels. We were in that -18 to -12 dB range. Let's take a look into Resolve and see where our levels are falling once we bring it into Resolve. So taking a look at that first clip right here, this is what we've got. And when we play through our clip, we're going to watch our meter right here and see where our levels are currently falling. Important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be... All right, so it's good. It's in that range of, -12 to -18 dB, somewhere in there. And then I can always boost it or lower it if I need to here in DaVinci Resolve, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes. Now, the second example there, I started out with my levels way too low, and then once I got into post, I boosted it up. And when you do that, sometimes it does introduce some of that background noise, maybe an extra little hiss or something. And the reason that you get that is because the preamps, a lot of times in a lot of these cameras, like these guys, the preamps are not great. So when you have really quiet audio and you try to boost it up, it just introduces background noise that we don't want to hear in our videos. So if you have to do it, you can do it. You can always use something like voice isolation to clean it up a little bit. But if you can set your levels properly on your camera, that's more important. And I would focus on that first so that once we get into Resolve, we don't have to try and fix things, right? We'll just have a good baseline, a good clean bunch of audio to start with. And the last example here, I did lower the volume, but when I recorded it, it was just peaking. You could see on the meters on the camera, it's actually peaking. Check it out. In Fairlight, you're not going to be able to fix it. So when you're peaking, there's not a whole lot you can do to bring back the data in your audio, right? That audio is chopped off. It's kind of lost. You can maybe work with it a little bit, but it's not ideal and it's not going to give you the best sound for your videos. So step number one is making sure that you get good audio levels when you're recording with your camera. Set it properly. All cameras in general you can jump in the menus and set your audio levels manually. I wouldn't set it automatically because that's going to create lots of fluctuations potentially in the recording of your audio, but set it manually. Pick a good spot where it's going to work good for you in your situation and your filming environment, and then start recording and get a good base level of audio to start with. So once we get into Resolve, then we can work with it a little bit more and fine tune it. So now that we've got our recording, it's in a good spot, we're going to bring this footage into DaVinci Resolve, and now we want to set our audio levels properly for our project, right? And for our editing. And for me, in general, I'm going to set my dialogue levels to around -10 dB. Let's jump into Resolve and take a look at our first example here. So this example, it was recorded with good levels, what I would call good levels to bring into Resolve, but they're still a little bit lower than I might want them to be for my project. So I'm going to boost the levels up. And I want it to come to around that -10 dB. Now I'm going to do this work in the Edit tab. You can jump into Fairlight if you want to, but you don't have to. So we are aiming for about -10 dB, give or take a little. It's not a problem if it goes a little over, a little under, but -10 dB is where we want our dialogue to live. So I'm going to play through this, and I'm going to adjust my volume of my clip, or adjust the gain, so that I get proper levels, and my meter is showing me about -10 dB. How can I do that? So to adjust our audio levels or our volume, we got a few different ways that we can do that. If you hover over your clip, you'll see this little white line there, and I can click, hold, and drag it up and down. Now, a little bonus tip, if you hold your shift key while you do it, it's going to drag a little more precisely for you. So we can adjust it that way. We can select our clip. We can open our inspector, go to our audio tab, and we can adjust our volume right here, which is actually the same thing as adjusting that white gain line we saw on the clip. So you can do that. And then you can also come over here and adjust your fader if you want to. Now, I recommend that you use either the inspector method or the clip gain line method first, because I like to save any adjustments I make to the fader until the end to help blend all of my different audio tracks together. So in this case, I'm just going to use the gain line that's right on the clip because I think that's the best way to do it in this case. So I'm just going to come in my inspector. I'm going to reset my volume. I'm going to play through the clip, and I'm just going to watch my meters here and boost those levels a little bit until it looks like it's around that -10 dB. So let's go ahead and do that. So when it comes to your audio, it's super important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be around that -12 dB range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work with once you get into Fairlight. All right, so that looks pretty good. It's in the ballpark, right? Now, I want it to be about here. It's okay if it fluctuates a little bit. We can always work on improving that with some compression and some dynamics later on. But for now, we've got good levels here, and now I'm happy with where my dialogue is, right? Dialogue we want at that -10 dB range. So now let's talk about some music, right? Check it out. In Resolve here, I'm just going to open up a power bin. I've got all kinds of music in here that I use in various projects, and I'm just going to grab something and drop it down into my timeline. So I'm going to solo my music track so we only hear that. Now, where do I want my music levels to be? Well, that kind of depends on your video and what sound you're looking for. Now, most music, when you get it, it's already going to be mastered, and it's already going to have a fairly loud volume because it's going to be created to some certain standard, and it's going to be mixed and created as a good high quality file already. So what you're going to find, and what I find most of the time, is that when I bring it into Resolve, it's actually a little too loud, right, for my video. I don't want it to be that loud. So generally, I'm going to drop back the volume a little bit. So let's play through this music clip, jumping back in Resolve here, and we can just see how it sounds and look at our meter and see where our levels are currently falling. So you can see we're all the way up the meters there. We're even peaking a little bit on the top there. So generally, when I put music into my video clips, I'm going to also come to my music clip, and I'm going to lower this down sometimes to about -10 dB, similar to where I put my dialogue, right? Because if I'm editing my dialogue and it's at that -10 dB, my viewer's watching it, I don't want the music to be crazy loud, right? I want it to be kind of similar, right, when there's no dialogue happening. So let's just play through that and see where our levels are currently falling if I lower my gain line there by 10 dB. So I think that's a better spot for my music, and in general, I'm going to set my music around that -10 dB range as well when there's no dialogue on top of it, right? I can make it a little bit louder or a little bit quieter. Again, it depends on the kind of music and the vibe and the feeling you want in your video. But somewhere around -10, again, is a good range to put your music if there's nothing else happening in your scene. Now, let's say maybe you've got your music underneath your dialogue track, right? So looking in Resolve here, if I unmute or unsolo my track and now I have talking on top of my music, let's play that and you can hear how that sounds. The music's going to be too loud and we're going to want to drop it back. Super important to set good levels inside. Okay, so too loud. So the easiest thing that most people are going to do is just lower the volume a little more of the music track. And you can totally do that, and it's a good place to start. So I'm going to grab that gain line, and I'm going to bring it down anywhere between -20 and -30 dB. And you're just going to have to listen to it because different songs are going to sound a little bit different as far as how that volume reacts when you lower it down. So let's just say in this case, I'm going to go about -25 dB. Looks pretty good. It'll play through it, hear how it sounds. Your camera, you want your levels to be around that -12 dB range. So even that in this case might be a little loud, so maybe I want to drop it back a little bit more. Come back to maybe -28 dB. And again, if you hold your shift key, that's going to allow you to be a little more precise there. So we're going to go about -28 range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work with once you get into Fairlight. So this is what it sounds like with some good audio. And looking at my meters here, we can see it's only coming up to about -28 dB. This is a good starting point for the music that's going to be underneath any dialogue track or any speaking track. Now, I do have some other great tips on creating some space for your dialogue when there's music underneath it. So I'll link up there. You can check out that card. I'll also throw it at the end of the video. You can check that out. 3 good tips on how you can make it sound even better other than just lowering the volume like we just did. But basics, lowering that volume is going to be a good place to start. So, like I said, with that music, anywhere between that -20 and -30 dB is usually a range that's going to work pretty good. You have to listen to it. A lot of audio is listening to it, and I can give you numbers and rules, but your ears are going to tell the full story for you. So make sure that the music sounds like it's in a good spot below your dialogue tracks if you're going to mix it together kind of like we did just here. The next part of audio that you might wonder where should my levels be is when it comes to sound effects. Now, sound effects has the biggest range of where you can set those levels, and a lot of it's going to be based on your ear. What do you hear? How do you want it to sound? How do you want those effects to come across in your video? Let's take a look at Resolve here. I've got just a few effects here. I'm going to solo my track. Now, like with music, sound effects are also already mastered. They're already brought up to certain levels of wherever the creator, how they wanted it to sound and the deliverable that they needed. So a lot of times we're going to make some adjustments here. I'm not going to just dump it in and leave it, right? Because it's not going to make sense. So for example, this first one, let's listen to it at its just normal volume as I just dropped it into the timeline. It's an explosion, a little detonation. Check it out. Okay, so it's pretty loud, right? And depending on your scene, maybe you want it to be that loud. Maybe you want that impact. But a lot of times you may need to drop it back just a little bit, even if it's only a few dB, right? Maybe 3 dB. And we can see that it's still peaking up to 5 here in my mixer on my meters there. So we want to watch our meters. We want to listen to it because listening to it is super important. We want it to sound the way we want it to sound in our video, right? And just making sure we're not peaking, right? Because if we boost any of these sound effects, sometimes you're going to peak and then it's just going to get distorted. And we don't want that. We don't want distorted audio. Check out another sound effect I have here. It's crickets. Now, something like that, I might leave that at its full volume, right? If I'm have a night scene and I'm looking out in the darkness, right? I might want to leave it like that. And in this case, I could boost it a little bit if I wanted to, and we're probably not going to peak. We'll watch our meters over here. Or maybe they're subtle, more subtle, and in the background, I'll drop it down a little bit. So in general, I'm going to set sound effects anywhere between -5 dB all the way down to -30 dB, depending on the type of sound effect. The last example here is like a whoosh kind of sound. Check this out. All right, so maybe I'm using that for a transition. I don't need it to be that loud, so I'm going to drop it back to like -13 dB. Right? A little more subtle, maybe just blend in with my video a little bit more. You don't want your sound effects standing way out and just seeming like they don't fit into the project, right? The idea with audio is to blend everything together. And that's why sound effects are going to require such a huge range that you could actually set for the level. So it's really up to you on how your video is looking, the feel, the vibe, what's happening, as far as how loud do you want those sound effects to be. So quick recap in DaVinci Resolve here. Dialogue levels, you want to be about -10 dB. Music, you could use it full volume if you want. I recommend dropping it back a little bit if there's no dialogue on top of it to maybe -10 dB, give or take in that range a little bit. If you're mixing dialogue on top of your music, you probably want to drop that music down to somewhere between -20 and -30 dB based on the way the music sounds. Again, we're using our ears. Your ears are your most valuable tool here when you're working with audio. It's got to sound good, right? Because if the numbers are the numbers and you're like, it doesn't sound good, you need to go ahead and make an adjustment. Sound effects. Sound effects have a wide range of where you can set those levels. We can go from, say, minus 5 dB all the way down to minus 30 dB, right? Make the sound effects fit in your scene, get the desired result and the feeling that you want for your sound effects in your video, and just decide where it sounds good, right? Again, go back to using our ears. We want it to sound good in our video, feel like it fits in, blend things together, and then our sound effects will be more successful if we keep those things in mind. Now that you've set all of your audio levels for your dialogue tracks, your sound effects tracks, your music tracks, we're gonna set all that up good first. Now it's time to start thinking about our deliverables, right? Where is this video gonna live? For me, in my case, it's YouTube, and that's what we're gonna use as an example here. So when we export our projects, we have a certain loudness level that we're allowed to have our videos be, so that when we upload it to a service like YouTube, it can get so loud before YouTube says, oh, nope, I'm gonna squash it down. And you don't want YouTube or any other platform to squash down your audio or compress your audio, because it can make it distorted and just make it not sound so good, right? We want to edit the audio, and I want it to sound the way I want it to sound. I don't want somebody else to come along after the fact and be like, nope, and squish down our audio. Not what I want, right? So we're going to take a look at the loudness levels for our overall video. Now, you measure the loudness of your video at the very end of your audio process. You don't want to worry about it on a track level. It's not a track level thing. It's measured in LUFS, and it's based on everything together as a whole. So you need to edit all your audio individually first, and then you can go ahead and check your loudness levels. So let's jump into Resolve. I'm going to show you how you can check those levels, how we can set our desired result, and how you can make adjustments if you need to, so that we're not exceeding those levels. We can come up and almost meet them, but we don't want to exceed those levels. So let's jump into Resolve and check it out. So in order to check the loudness of all these random things I have in my timeline, let's say it's a fully edited video, I'm going to jump into the Fairlight page. I'm going to go ahead and close my media pool. And we're going to use a new tool here that you might not be familiar with, and it's the loudness meter or the loudness scale. So what you need to do is turn on this right here, and that's going to allow us to see our bus 1 over here in our tracks. Now, if we come over to our bus 1 and we just make it a little bit bigger here, you'll see now we have loudness history, and we want to go ahead and turn that on. So as we play through our video, we're going to see a line on this graph that's going to tell us where our current loudness levels are. And again, LUFS is a measure of everything together, right? It's not an individual track, it's everything together. Where is that loudness level of our entire video? Now we can set different loudness levels by coming up to the meter section up here. If we click on this drop down, we've got different options here that we can pick. And now as of DaVinci Resolve 18.6, we actually have a YouTube setting right here. So I'm going to select that. And what we're allowed to do is go up to minus 14 LUFS for YouTube. Now you can set this on a project level, but I'm just going to do it the way I showed it here for now, just for simplicity reasons. But now our unit of measure is set to be minus 14. We can see it up here on our graph. And if we look down in our bus 1 area, we can see minus 14. That's a white line, and that's as high as we want our audio to get. If it's higher, YouTube will compress it when we upload to YouTube. If it's lower, we can bring it up a little bit just so that way it's loud enough on YouTube. So let's go back to the beginning of our clip. I'm going to come up here, and then these two buttons right here just allow us to reset the metering here. So I'm going to reset and hit start. And now all I'm going to do is just play through the video, and we're going to see the graph being created that's going to tell us what our loudness levels are. So let's go ahead and play the video. So when it comes to your audio, it's super important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be around that minus 12 dB range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work with once you get into Fairlight. So this is what it sounds like with some good audio levels where it should be. We're going to take this and bring it into Resolve and work. Random stuff happening in the timeline here, but the concept is the same for your project, right? Edit your whole project together, good levels on everything. Now we're checking the loudness before we deliver it, right? So when I look at this graph here, it's currently blue, and it's below this minus 14 line, which is what I want. Because if it goes over that minus 14 line, YouTube's going to push it down and compress it, and we don't want that. So we can go all the way up to that line, and let's say I wanted to boost it up a little bit more. How would I do that? Well, the easiest way is to come to our mixer, right? I'm just expand this out. On our bus 1, which is our main output, I can come down here and just use the fader and just boost it up a little bit. So that's going to take all my audio levels. I don't have to adjust anything individually. I can just bring them all up a little bit, and I'm going to get that extra volume out of my clip, right? You wonder why some videos are quiet on YouTube and some videos are loud? It's because some videos don't account for the loudness levels that we are allowed to achieve, right? So if I come back to the beginning of the clip, I'm just going to go ahead and reset and start the metering again. And now as I play through, you can see right here, I boosted it up in my main bus. Now watch this blue line. It's going to be a whole lot higher. So when it comes to your audio, it's super important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be around that -12 dB range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work with. Okay, so what do we notice here? Right now, we're over top of that -14 LUFS. It's in the red even, and then it actually comes and dips back down, which is good. We want it to dip back down, but you don't want to go over that line at all. And for me, most of the time, I'm going to make sure I'm 1 to 2 to 3 maybe dB below that line, just to make sure that YouTube isn't going to compress it down on me. So if we wanted to fix that, I'm going to come back to the beginning of my timeline here. I'm just going to lower this down. Let's say I want it to be a little lower. I'm going to drop it below the unity gain there a little bit. Again, reset my metering, play through, and let's see where the line falls this time. So when it comes to your audio, it's super important to set good levels inside your camera. You want your levels to be around that -12 dB range, because if you don't, it's just going to be harder to work. All right, so we can see that our levels there are much better. And in this case, because I set my levels good on a track level, I can actually just leave this pretty much where it was, right? I don't really have to adjust it. Now, one bonus tip here is just to make sure you're not peaking or going over any of the LUFS levels, right? Because we don't want YouTube to compress it. Two things you could try. One, you can open up your dynamics and just turn on your compressor. And I'd even bring this up a little bit because I don't need to compress it much. Just in case it gets close to the end, I'm going to allow the compressor to just knock it back just a little bit, just a little compression. You can do that if you want. Or you can turn that off. You can turn on the limiter, right? And I'm just going to bring it up and I'm going to limit this somewhere around, I'd do like 1 dB, right? So that way, if it gets up to those upper levels, on accident, maybe I had left a loud sound effect in or something, it's not going to peak, right? We're going to limit that audio and it's going to prevent anything going over that -14 LUFS should we get up too high. Now, this is for YouTube, a -14 LUFS, right? But if you're editing for something like broadcast TV, maybe you need something like -23 LUFS. Other platforms have other requirements, and you're just going to have to check to see what you have to meet in order for your audio to sound the best that it can, the loudest that it can, and for everything to just be in the right spot so that it doesn't get compressed by wherever you're deciding to upload your videos. Now, loudness is a whole video on its own. I'll get into it more and make another video about that because I have one about it. It's a little old. Techniques are very similar. We do have some new tools that we can work with when it comes to loudness in our videos, but that is how you're going to set the final output there for your videos, for YouTube, for Netflix, wherever it might be. You want to make sure that your overall loudness levels are all set. And remember, set all your tracks first, and then you look at your loudness levels at the very end. So that way you make sure you're within the guidelines and the requirements for the given platform that you'll be posting your film or your video to. So that is it, guys. That is audio levels in a nutshell, from camera right here to DaVinci Resolve, to exporting and uploading to the platform of your choice. Very, very important to make sure we get these things set up properly right from the get-go, because if you don't, it just makes more work in the long run, right? And when it comes to your videos, audio is so important. It's almost, if not more important than the way the video quality looks. I'm going to say it's a little bit more important, right? Because we can all watch a video that doesn't look great but sounds good. But if we have to watch a video that looks beautiful but sounds like garbage, let's be honest, I'm being honest, I'm not going to sit there and watch it. I'm just going to move on to the next video. So I hope you guys found this helpful. If you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about audio, all things audio here in Fairlight. And if you have any questions on any of this stuff, anything about levels or your audio, drop a comment down below. I'm more than happy to jump down there and answer some questions if I can. So with that said, guys, get your audio sounding good, set those levels properly, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.